No worries. My Lords, I thank the Noble Lady Baroness Stewart of Edgbaston for securing this important debate and for her clear introduction, which rightly highlighted Francis Fukuyama, who was always bizarrely hubristic with his end of history thesis and now looks indeed very far into the past. My contribution is going to have two foci. One, to urge that we consider the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation in the context of the behaviour of its second most powerful member, Russia, and its allies in the continuing attack on Ukraine, other organisation members including Iran and Belarus, and of course China. My other focus will be somewhat disagreeing with the Noble Lord Hannon on one aspect of what has been described as the Shanghai spirit, and one particular part of it, the so-called respect for the diversity of civilisations. But returning to my first focus, I wish to report to the House a little of my experiences last week when I travelled with fellow parliamentarians with financial support from British companies that I'll be appropriately declaring in due course to Ukraine as a part of a delegation from the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Explosive Weapons and their impacts. The focus was on the clearing of mines and unexploded ordnance, something that the Ukrainians have to deal with at a totally unprecedented scale, at least in the form of risk. 29% of their nation, 174,000 square kilometres, is at risk of being affected by mines and unexploded ordnance. Visiting the State Emergency Services of Ukraine, the Mines Advisory Group and the Halo Trust projects, and we also saw the crucial efforts to treat those who've fallen victims to the mines at the charities Superhumans and Unbroken. We saw the human cost of the continuing Russian assault. We also saw close up the vicious and sometimes internationally illegal weapons that the Russians and their allies are using against civilian populations. Holding a submunition, a cluster bomb, obviously once it had been rendered safe, and seeing a children's storybook booby-trapped with explosive. It was an acute demonstration of the sheer difficulties the Ukrainians face and the nature of the actions of the Russian-led alliance, many of whose members were in Xinjiang. Understandably, in the face of the horrors of the Israeli assault on Gaza and the desperate desire to get the Israeli hostages home, media and even political focus has not always been on Ukraine. But I want to stress the importance of continuing to provide the Ukrainians with practical support and moral support too, both directly and also through projects such as that from BBC Media Action, which is assisting in the vital task of explosive ordnance risk education. Behind that must be a strong, determined delivery of the message from the international community, as much as the international community as we can bring together, that there is a principle that larger countries cannot simply decide to take chunks out of their neighbours. Further, that there are rules of war, and breaking these must not just be called out, but must have genuine, long-term, serious consequences for the regimes responsible. The human race has a long way to go. It was back in 697 that the law of innocence was promulgated by Gaelic and Pictic nobles at the Synod of Bur. It extended what had been protection for monks and religious male figures to women and other non-combatants. That is a very long time ago, and we still have failed to deliver that, as I saw in Ukraine. I come now to the second part of my contribution today, which is around the issue of the term civilisations, which, as I noted, is described as part of the Shanghai spirit. Now, this is a language that's permeating increasingly many international settings, frequently from the influence of China. I note, for example, that on June 7, 2024, the UN General Assembly adopted June 10 as the International Day for Dialogue Among Civilisations. I would agree with the words of the US representative during that debate that we should instead be talking about cultures, and the US representative then urged vigilance over how words like civilisation are used. Now, this is a term in the form of Western civilisation that we are hearing increasingly in your Lordship's House. And I'd ask those who are increasingly using it to consider how they are playing into the hands of dangerous forces who are using it in places like Xinjiang. In making claims of exceptionalism, of the purity of one historical cultural formulation over another, that is playing into the hands of the narrative that we are hearing from China and other countries, which really needs to be challenged, not accepted. There's also, I'm pleased to say, a growing reaction against that, against the idea of discrete, distinct civilisations, an international shedding of civilisational thinking. And I note that in Your Lordship's library today, on display is the cover of Josephine Quinn's excellent book, How the Rest Made the West, which very much addresses this issue. She notes that Polybius's remark that the Romans were a multicultural melting pot, willing to substitute their customs for better practices from elsewhere. There is no such thing as pure Roman civilization or indeed Western civilization. Now, this book explicitly takes aim at the influential Samuel P. Huntington's 1996 Clash of Civilizations thesis, which is indeed effectively being adopted in this debate, which is deeply dangerous, and it's a framing for a great deal of Islamophobic and other xenophobic rhetoric and action. Challenging this claim is an urgent task. And responding to the Noble Lord Hannon, I point out that actually democracy and democratic elements have a very long history, going back, of course, as is often cited, to ancient Greece, but much further than that, millennia before, to ancient Assyria.